From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. Everyone having a good time today at the National Book Festival? Yeah? My name is Christy Chasen. I'm a liaison. I'm a liaison specialist at the Library of Congress Veterans History Project, a project which collects and preserves the stories of wartime veterans. I'm very excited to introduce Lisa McMann, a New York Times bestselling author of fiction for young adults and children. McMahon says of writing, "Writing is hard. There are a lot of disappointments and no guarantees. Be prepared to write a second or third or 15th novel if the first ones don't sell." But her books have sold very well, in fact. Her Wake trilogy is wildly popular. Crash, book one in her new Vision series, is a supernatural thriller not to be missed. And her series, The Unwanteds, is an epic adventure that Kirkus Reviews calls The Hunger Games meets Harry Potter. And also that James A. Owen, author and illustrator of Here There Be Dragons, says is like discovering a brilliant lost children's classic. So please join me in welcoming, for her first appearance at the National Book Festival, Lisa McMann. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you, Christy. It is so great to be here. What an honor and a privilege to get to come to our nation's capital and talk about the Unwanted series and some of my other books. I'm just thrilled to be here, and I feel very proud to get to spend some time with you guys today. When I was in the 4th grade, my teacher, Mr. Avink, told the class that everybody was going to be doing a project. We were all going to be writing a story, and we were going to write a story, and the person who wrote the best story would get to do something called, they would get to visit the Young Authors Conference, which was like a place where you went for a whole day. You got out of school, and you got to go to this conference and spend the day with other writers and other kids whose stories also won. And I heard the magic words, "get out of school for a day," and I was like, yes, I'm gonna win this thing, because that was one of my goals in 4th grade, was to get out of school whenever I could. So I decided to write the most amazing story in the history of the universe, which I totally did. Now, how many of you guys out there have also written the most amazing story in the history of the universe? Yes, you have. Yeah, that's right. That's right. We all have. And so I wrote a book, and it's called Baby May's Birthday. And it was about a little elephant named Baby May, and she went around the jungle telling all of her friends that it's her birthday, and they were all like, yay, happy birthday. And then at the end, there was a big surprise party. Sounds really interesting, right? Who would actually want to read that book? Oh, there's a few of you. You're very nice. Thank you. So Baby May, I think probably could have used a few revisions. I think if I were to revise that story today, I might add a new character, like maybe a lion, to come in at the end with all the big party and, like eat everybody. I think that would be cool, right? I mean, but otherwise my jungle was pretty tame, so it wasn't a real scary place to be. But one day, Mr. Avink called me out of class, and usually when that happened, it wasn't a good thing. So I was a little nervous. He said, "Lisa, can you step out here, please?" And I went outside in the hallway, and he said, "I just want you to know that I really loved your story, Baby May's Birthday, and you are going to the Young Authors Conference." Wow, right? And I remember thinking how awesome this was. And it wasn't because I was going to get out of school for the day. It was because my teacher liked my story. He thought I was a good writer. And I sat there grinning at him, and he said, I can't even let you back in the classroom with that big smile on your face, because we're not going to tell the other kids until tomorrow. So we need to keep our secret. why don't you go take a walk down the hallway and, go get a drink and think about how cool this is for you, and then come on back in the room whenever you're ready. And I'm like, okay. And so he goes back in the classroom, and I go down the hallway, and I'm just sort of floating down the hallway thinking, I'm going to be a writer. And that was my moment. That's when I decided that's what I want to do. I want to be a writer. Now, it took a few years for me to actually realize that if you're going to be a writer, you actually have to write things. Not just the one story, I mean, I had my published book. It was, cardboard cover and hand drawings and stuff in there. But I realized I had to keep writing if I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. So I did. I started writing a lot of poems, and I'm not very good at poems. Yeah, but by the time I was a senior in high school, I had another amazing teacher. His name was Mr. Mulder, and I had him for English. And one day, I did an assignment. We had to write poems, and I wrote this poem. And then he called me. It was like a couple months later. He called me up to his desk and said, Lisa, I just wanted to give you this. And he handed me an envelope. And I opened it up, and I was like, what is this? I'm pulling out a piece of paper, and it says, congratulations. And I'm reading it, and it says, you've won honorable mention. And then a check falls out, and I look at it, and it's a check for $10. I won $10 for my poem. And I said, what happened? How did this even happen? And he said, I submitted this into a contest for you. And I said, why didn't you tell me you were going to do that? And he said, because I knew you wouldn't let me. And he was right. I didn't want anybody to read my stuff. I was too scared. And so, it wasn't just the fact that I got this letter and the honorable mention, and it wasn't, the check for $10, although that was pretty big money back in 1985. But it was the fact that my teacher, Mr. Mulder, believed in me. And he went out of his way to do something extra that he didn't have to do by submitting this story on my behalf. And it made me feel really confident, made me feel like maybe I can do this. So I went to college, and I decided to be a writer. I wanted to do that. After college, I started writing stories, some picture books, and I had my old writer's market, and I'm reading through it, finding places to send my stuff so I could get published. Because, one day I wanted to have fan mail. That was my goal, right? Okay, so that was, a pretty good goal to have. But I started sending out my stuff, and I kept waiting for somebody to say, oh, you're amazing, you're wonderful. And back then, there was no internet, no email. And so I'm mailing all this stuff out, and it takes 6 months, a year, 2 years to get a response. And always, those responses were rejection letters. Sorry, the story isn't for us. I'm sorry, it's just not good enough. And after a while, I gave up. I couldn't take the rejection anymore. I got tired of people telling me I wasn't good enough. So I quit writing for 10 years. I didn't write anything. I got married, I had kids, I became a realtor. I loved that job. It was great. And one night, after I'd been a realtor for like 7 years, my broker came into the office, and I was sitting there working on a deal, and he said, Lisa, you should really get a hobby. You work way too much. You should go find something that you want to do just for yourself. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, what would I do? I can't even think of anything I would want to go do besides this, because I loved what I did. But I thought about it for a while, and eventually I started to pull out my stories that I'd written in college and after college, and I started to read them again, and I realized they were really terrible. They were really bad. So, but then I came across one that was kind of good. It was something I could work with. So I started working on it. And then I found a website for writers where you could submit your work, and people would critique it. So after I worked on it for a while and revised it, and I sent it in, I sat there and hit refresh, waiting for the comments to come in and people telling me how great it was, right? But that didn't happen. I got a lot of comments from people who said, this doesn't make sense, or maybe you want to think about doing this to make it better. And this time, instead of feeling bad about somebody sort of rejecting my work, I decided to really take that information in and really think about it and try and rework my stories with the advice of other writers. And after a while, I got my first story published. And then I had like 30 more short stories published. And fast forwarding to 2004, I won a contest. And I won $10,000 for a short story, which is unheard of and never ever happens. It just was a really strange, awesome contest. And but that gave me enough courage to say, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can write a novel. At the same time we were moving to Phoenix, I was going to be quitting my real estate job. And so I thought, maybe here's my nest egg. Here's my $10,000. I'm going to hang on to this, and I'm going to work from home and write a novel. I sat there for 18 months, staring at a blank Word document, trying to figure out how to write a novel. I managed to write a couple of letters to the editor, and that was about it. So finally, one day, I put so much pressure on myself, I decided to let myself off the hook. I said, okay, go to the movies. I went to like 10 movies, all in 1 week. It was great. I got so inspired, and I started to read some of the books I loved when I was a kid, and I started to read new books, and I just became more and more inspired to write. And I came up with this idea, and I started writing furiously, frantically, getting a manuscript written. And once I was finished, I revised it, and then I had to write a query letter to try and get an agent. And I worked on that, and I started to submit my work to try and get an agent. And yay, internet, I could do it by email, and that was awesome. So things moved a little faster than they did the last time I tried to get published. But after about 100 rejections, I realized it was time to move on to the next book. Now, luckily, I kept writing all during that time, and I was ready to try and publish another book, except the second book was crap. It was terrible. It was a practice novel, and it always will be. I'll never go back to that book, but I do not regret a minute of writing that because it helped me get better. While I was writing that and finishing up that novel, even though I knew I wasn't going to do anything with it, I had a dream. I had a dream that I was in my husband's dream, watching what he was dreaming about. You got that? It's kind of difficult, but here I am inside my husband's dream, looking at his dream, okay? I woke up from that dream, and I wrote that down because I thought, that sounds cool, right? And do any of you write your dreams down? And then in the morning, it's like a mess, right? You're like, what was I thinking? Did I really think this was a good idea? But this time, I thought it was an awesome idea, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if there was a girl who got sucked into other people's dreams? And what if she couldn't control it? And what if there was a hot guy named Cabe who comes along and dreams about killing someone? And then maybe he dreams about her. And I wrote that novel in 7 extremely long days. My kids would come home from school, and they'd ask me for stuff, and I'd be like, yeah, sure, anything you want. And now we have a pony, but I don't know. But, I was so focused, and I wrote for like 18 hours a day, and I wrote this book, and it's a pretty short book. But I revised it and made it longer, and I just had a feeling about it. And when I started trying to get that book published, or to get an agent for that book, it took about 2 hours for the responses to come in. Out of 12 queries I sent, 7 agents contacted me wanting to read the full manuscript. And by Friday of that week, I had an agent. And soon after, he sold it with a 2-book deal to Simon & Schuster. And that was just an amazing moment, and that's my first book, Wake. And then I wrote 2 other books in that trilogy. I've written some other stuff. In the meantime, I was writing a new idea. As I was writing the Wake trilogy, one day my kids came home from school, and they had a letter. And on the letter it said, "Dear parents, we are very sorry to tell you that there will no longer be any arts classes in our school because of budget cuts." And I remember reading this letter and thinking, this is terrible. My kids were 12 and 9. They loved the arts classes, art, music, theater. And I knew that they would be devastated. And I looked at them and I said, wow, you guys, I am so sorry. It kind of feels like you're being punished for being creative. And then I thought, wait a second. What if there really was a world where kids were punished for being creative? And I said it out loud. And my 12-year-old son said, not just punished, sent to their deaths. And I said, yes, I loved that idea. It sounded awesome. It sounded like a book I would want to read. I want to find out, how do they get out of that? And so that's how the Unwanteds began. My kids were the inspiration for that series. Now book 3 is out, and just a week or 2 ago, we hit the New York Times best-selling series list with that series, and I'm just thrilled about it because my kids were so involved. Now, I wrote that first chapter, this dystopian world, the world of Quill, where once a year, everybody gathered for the big purge, where all the kids were put into categories. The 13-year-olds were all divided into wanteds, necessaries, and unwanteds. The unwanteds were the ones who were caught being creative. Maybe they sang a song, or maybe they were caught drawing with a stick in the dirt. And all of those unwanteds, when they were declared unwanted, they're chained together, they're put on a bus, brought to the death farm. When they get off the bus, the gate opens wide. These enormous hulking eliminators are there to take them to their deaths. How many of you guys would be just a little bit scared? Just a little bit, yeah. Just a few of us. I would be. So I'm writing this, and I'm thinking, something needs to happen soon, or else it's going to be a really short book. Because, chapter 2, and then they all die, the end. We have no characters left. So I knew something had to happen, but I wasn't sure what it was until I started thinking about my childhood favorite books. And I thought about the Narnia series. Any Narnia lovers out there? Yeah, I loved that. I love that series so much, and it was a big influence on the books. It was mentioned that on the cover of the books, there's a little note here. Kirkus Reviews said it's like The Hunger Games meets Harry Potter, which I thought was an absolutely fantastic quote to have on your book. I'm thrilled about it. But when I was writing it, The Hunger Games didn't exist, and I hadn't really had Harry Potter in mind. It was Narnia. So I was thinking like The Giver meets Narnia, and that's what was in my head. But very happy to have that comparison to these wonderful series. But anyway, I realized what I needed was magic. I needed a magical world. And the guy who's supposed to be sending all of these creative kids to their death is secretly saving them in his magical world called Arteme, teaching them to use their artistic abilities as magic, both for fun, but also as weapons in case they ever get discovered. That, I realized, was the way this story was going to go. Now, I had never written magic before, and I wasn't quite sure I knew how to do it. So I had to call in the experts. I said, kids, come in the living room. We're gonna brainstorm. Help me figure out, what are we gonna do with magic, and what kind of magic should we do with this kind of a book? And I said, well, I'm thinking, what if we could use like art supplies? as magical components. And my daughter immediately says, well, yeah, you could do like, have a paintbrush and paint yourself invisible. And I was like, cool, good idea. Wrote that down. My son said, what if you could pick up a handful of paper clips, throw them at your enemy, they'd go soaring out and stab through their clothing and stick them to the wall. And I'm like, wow, I kind of love that too. But then the 9-year-old said, what if there's not a wall there for them to stick to, right? And the 12-year-old said, well, it doesn't have to be a wall, it could be a tree. The 9-year-old said, what if there's not a tree there, right? So they went back and forth making up the rules of this particular spell. And I loved that. I was watching them do that, and I thought, this is so cool. Now, they helped me with a lot of the magic in the book, and they continue to help me. And it took me several years to write that first book. My kids are now 19 and 16. And my son began drawing some of the characters for me a few years ago. And I have different postcards that I hand out with the series. And some of you who came through my line earlier have one of his drawings of the world of Quill. So he helps me do that. I show these when I go to schools and do school visits and show some of his other artwork that he does and talk about how, as a family, we developed this idea for the Unwanteds. So, with that, I know we're running out of time, so I want to make sure we have time for questions. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. Oh, is there a microphone? Yes, there are microphones up front here, so if you want to come up.
I have your book right here, and the way you said it, spoiler alert, it sounds really funny, and I can't wait to read it. My friend's gonna make fun of me for reading so much in class, and then when they go outside, like when we have PE, they're like, oh man, I so wish we were inside reading books right now. And then I'm like, I told you. But I like to read and kind of get yelled at because I don't read as often. But reading, sometimes I like to read about people's lives and how they go through stuff because it just seems kind of magical.
Cool. I love that. I think that's really awesome. And I think, if you can read a book and find yourself sort of in that story, do you feel like that sometimes? Like you could maybe live there? That would be a really cool place to be. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I have one question, but before that, your books are truly amazing.
Thank you. You're the sweetest. Thank you so much.
And my question is, other than your kids and your family, what other inspiration did you have for the land of Quill and Artemis?
Well, this is an interesting question, and hardly anybody asks me that. And I like to tell them this little story. The land of Artemis is designed, the way everything's set up in there, it's modeled after a little plot of land in West Michigan where my mother grew up on Lake Michigan, with the lake right out there, and then there was a mansion, and that plot of land where she lived back in the 1920s used to be a zoo, and it had all kinds of crazy animals there. It was so cool. But when I saw the plans of what that land looked like, I thought this would be a great world and a layout for this series. So that's how that land got sort of inspired. And the world of Quill, when my son said, send those creative kids to their deaths, I thought, what kind of world would it have to be? What kind of government would there have to be there in order for people to send their children and let this happen? So I had to really think about how awful and stark the world would have to be in order for something like that to happen. So, does that answer your question? Cool, thanks.
I'm really into your series, so I was wondering when your 4th book is going to come out and what it's called.
Oh, very good. Oh, man. I'm not sure if I can say what it's called yet. Can I? Yeah? I got the yes from Simon & Schuster. Woo! Okay, you guys are the first people to hear about this. Book 4 is called The Unwanteds, island of legends. Woo! All right, it'll be out September 2 of next year. But then after that, I know it's a whole year for that one, but after that, it'll be 6 months for book 5 and 6 months for book 6 and 6 months for book 7. We're going to speed it up so that you guys don't have to wait so long. Oh, yes, hi.
Hi. I'm an aspiring writer myself, and I'm sort of curious as to how you pace yourself as a writer. How do you set aside your schedule for the day?
That's a great question. When I was still doing real estate, I would just block off some time late at night after my kids went to bed, and I would faithfully show up, and I'd have some writer friends, and we would write for an hour together, and then exchange work, and so we could read each other's stuff and comment, and that held me accountable so that I would actually get some writing done every day. When I started doing it full time, you know, I work really well with a deadline, and if I don't have a deadline, I will find every possible thing you can do in the house without actually opening that Word document. So I am definitely a procrastinator, but if I give myself a deadline or say I need this many chapters by Friday, or I need, you know, the whole book's got to be done by whatever date, and I usually set a date a little bit sooner than when my editor's going to want it. So I just have to really stay on top of myself and make sure I'm sitting down and opening up that document. That's sometimes the hardest thing to do, is to open up the Word doc or whatever program you use and actually start writing. And once I'm going, then I can go for hours. So, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Okay.
How long does it take for you to make one book in 1 year?
To write one book, is that what you mean? How long does it take to write it?
In 1 year.
In 1 year. Well, I probably spend about 6 months on each book, but I do it in spurts. So I'll write the whole rough draft, and that'll take maybe 2 months, and then I'll take a break for 2 months or something and go write a different rough draft of a different book. Is that what you mean, or am I missing it?
Yes.
You're getting it? Okay, good.
And I also love to make books that are made out of only paper.
Ah, I love that. That's awesome. Keep doing that, okay?
Okay.
Okay, and then I'll come to your book signing someday.
Hi, so I was actually going to ask how you thought of the Wake series, the idea of her actually being able to go into dreams and not, you know, it being her choice, and you answered that question. But how did you continue the, the process of these different dreams that you went into, and how, dangerous it actually got, and how she got into, kind of being part of the police and helping with that?
How did I come up with the idea to go that deep into it? It didn't. I wrote the entire first book without actually thinking of a very key component. And I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but there's a component in the first book that was added after everything was written, and that became very vital to the rest of the series and the personal challenge that Janie faces, and the choice that she has to make. So that came to me. There's another influence too. One was my son, and that had something to do with him needing glasses. And the other is 21 Jump Street. For real, yeah, it is. So, thank you. You bet.
Why did you decide to put the ancient sector in the Unwanteds?
That is an awesome question. Because the government there really only wants people it finds to be useful to them. And at a certain time, the High Priest Justine believes that people cease to be useful, and therefore they should be put somewhere where she doesn't have to think about them or worry about them at all. So that's why. Good questions. Wow, you guys are so smart.
I was wondering, like, how you came up with the magical creatures in Arteme and...
Well, when I was writing, I think it's chapter 5, I was writing when they walk in the front door for the first time, and there's this giant cheetah statue who's like 20 feet tall or whatever. And then as I'm writing it, in my head, the statue moved. And that's how Simber became alive. So I was right when I was writing it. I hadn't planned on that at all. So I think we are past time. And I'm sure you guys want to go see some other stuff. But I just want to say thank you so much for all your wonderful support. You are awesome. I had so much fun. I see so many familiar faces from earlier. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.